Hey folks, tonight we're kicking off with simple meals, metal spoons, and boiled grub for the third-class passengers on the ship. RMS Titanic? Because while most people dream of caviar and crystal chandeliers, most passengers were lucky just to get a whole boiled potato. Totally different from first-class dining, with fancy menus and wine lists that read like Shakespeare plays. Third-class dining was all about calories, not class. But hey, that boiled cabbage wasn't exactly boring either. So before you get comfy, take a sec to like and subscribe, but only if you really dig what I'm doing here. Also, drop a comment where you're watching from and what time it is. Always cool to see folks from all over tuning in. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for some white noise. And let's dive into tonight's journey. You were bracing for the worst. When you bought a third-class ticket on the RMS Titanic, luxury wasn't on your mind. You thought, please, just give me a bed, a floor to stand on, and something edible that doesn't jump around. You'd heard the horror stories third-class passengers, crammed into dark, suffocating spaces with more rats than spoons. So when you step into the third-class dining room on Deck F, you pause, because honestly, this place isn't bad. No hay bales, no livestock wandering around. And get this, it doesn't smell like despair. Instead, you see long wooden tables, real chairs, not barrels, and walls actually painted white, not peeling white, but intentional white. Electric lights overhead, not candles stuck in, turnips, and tiled floors beneath your feet. You blink. Are you in the right place? Yep. This is third class on the Titanic, where you've just been gently but firmly upgraded from third class to respectable person who uses cutlery. Sure, it's at the back of the ship, below half the wealthy continent and its silverware. You're not exactly competing with street vendors, but for most passengers in your cabin, this beats anything they've had back home. Cleaner, warmer, safer, and with more potatoes per square foot than most Irish farms. No menu. And you definitely won't be choosing between duck confit and dill-dotted salmon. But the food is served hot on schedule by managers who don't yell at you. You eat at a real table, sitting next to other immigrants just like you, carrying a suitcase, a dream, and maybe a relative who keeps forgetting their shoes. No music, no booze, and bread hard enough to double as a weapon. But the vibe is weirdly wonderful, quite formal. For the first time in a while, you're not treated like luggage with teeth. You're a passenger. You're welcome here. You step into the third-class dining room and immediately think, this place is too clean. Something's off. Where's the leaks? The buckets? The guy pulling turnips from his coat? But no, you're really here. You carefully step across the tile floor, half afraid it'll cave in from filth or disappoint you. But nope, it's solid, neatly patterned, and dare I say, pretty fancy. The room stretches long down, Deck F, with rows of sturdy wooden tables and chairs. Feels a bit like a school cafeteria if the school had 700 students, no blackboard, and everyone brought their own books and luggage trunks, tables screwed into the floor, probably so they don't slide into your lap if the ship tilts. Quite cozy. Above, bright electric lights. No flicker. No gas. Electricity. You've heard about these things in newspapers, places with switches and wires that don't need candles. oil, or magic. Now you're sitting right under them, eating, pretending everything's totally normal. And the walls, shiny white, suspiciously mold-free. No damp patches anywhere in sight. You start wondering if you accidentally wandered into second class. But the lack of napkins and the presence of 14 screaming kids yelling in 7 different languages quickly set you straight. The air smells faintly of boiled stuff, probably potatoes, with a hint of soap. And here's the kicker soap in third class. Someone on the White Star Line design team clearly went a little overboard. You sit down on a bench, elbow to elbow, with strangers you'll probably never understand. A Swedish guy nods at you. A Sicilian woman is praying over her bread. A kid with a spoon as big as his arm is testing gravity's limits. This isn't luxury, it's order. Food served on time in a well-lit, airy, somewhat sanitary room. You eat together, side by side, not shoved into corners like cargo. And if you've crossed countries just to have a shot at tomorrow, this dining room feels like you've arrived. Think third class on the Titanic served everyone all at once. Think again. You quickly realize eating in third class isn't about mealtime, it's about strategy. With over 700 passengers fighting for seats and stew, the only way to make it work is a traffic control system, a scheduled shift. No printed timetable, no polite chimes. It's more natural. A collective instinct, like migrating birds. You see people stand up. You hear plates clink and someone mutter, "Our turn." That's your cue. Your shift's up. You squeeze in. You sit down. You don't ask how much time's left. Spoiler, less than you want. Early eaters get everything piping hot and intact. Bread still soft. Stew hasn't turned into a weird jelly. These folks move like trained pros. Elbows tucked. Spoons decisive. Impressive stuff. Then there's your group. The middle shift. You get the cold stew. Slightly wobbly benches. And a table that smells like regret and carrots. You tell yourself that builds character. And finally, the last shift, the latecomers, the stew survivors. They eat slowly, surrounded by breadcrumbs and chaos. Sipping tea that probably doubles as dishwater. They arrive starving and leave, thoughtful. But no matter when you sit down, there's an unspoken rule. Eat first. Chat later. Food's here. Time's tight. And someone's probably eyeing your seat. Conversations, if they happen, are short and practical. Pass the bread. This fork's still warm. Is that cabbage? It's still warm? No complaints. No drama. Because even with the rush, shared utensils, and mystery ingredients, this is still a luxury compared to what most third-class passengers were used to. When your turn's done, you stand, clear your plate, and step aside for the next group. Like passing a torch in a potato-fueled relay race. Run on politeness. You head back to your cabin a bit fuller, a bit sharper, and with a newfound respect for the many ways to cook a meal. Morning comes early on the Titanic, especially in third class, the classroom where light filters in from nowhere, and someone's kid is always crying. You wake up, get dressed if you can call, ironing yesterday's clothes, getting dressed, and follow the smell of warm carbs to the dining room. Breakfast is served. No bells, no butlers, no musicals. Just clinking dishes and a waiter vaguely nodding. At you like to say. Yeah, it's edible. You sit and look around. The vibe is focused. Too early to chat. Too late to sleep. And just right to eat. Something that'll stick to your stomach like a loyal pet all day long. On the table. A generous portion of porridge. Thick like warm wallpaper paste, but with way more nutrients. You don't ask what kind of cereal it is. Nobody does. It's hot, and that's what counts. Next to it, some bread slices surely baked this week, thick, plain, and heroically refusing to crumble. A pat of margarine nearby, pretending to be butter, but fooling no one. Then there's the tea. Eternal, reliable, toast this week, thick, plain, and heroic in their stubborn refusal to crumble. One pat of margarine nearby, pretending to be butter, but fooling absolutely no one. Then comes the tea, eternal, reliable, and strong enough to bend a spoon, served in a tin cup, steaming hot and bitter with the flavor of boiling determination. It pairs perfectly with bread if your goal is hydration and emotional repair. Some lucky tables get orange marmalade, a citrus surprise like sunshine mixed with sugar in, kept in a jar. If your table scores that jar, it's guarded like treasure and handed out like, and even though variety was MIA, the meal still somehow hit the spot. No bacon, no eggs, not even a sad little sausage. But you felt nourished, steady, like your gut just got wrapped in a cozy blanket and told to chill. This breakfast won't blow your mind, but it'll keep you steady on a rocking ship with no elevators and way too many stairs. By noon, breakfast has fully soaked into your soul, and your body politely suggests it's time for another round of starchy diplomacy. This is important dinner, formerly known as lunch, because Edwardian folks loved confusing future generations. You shuffle into the dining room, maybe for your second or third shift. Who knows, time on the ship is measured in meal hours, not minutes. The room smells like steam, gravy, and misplaced optimism. The waiter plunks a bowl of soup in front of you. It's hot, kind of veggie-ish, with that beige color that screams, I have no idea what's in me. Even the chef's clueless, but it's comforting, like a warm bath would be if that bath came with turnips. Then comes the main event, a slab of roast beef, generously called roast because it's cooked with heat, and beef because, well, it's not poultry. It's tough, chewy, and definitely filling. Next to it, a mountain of boiled potatoes piled so high you half expect a goat to start climbing them. Maybe some thick, salty gravy dumped on like armor, not to flavor the meat, but to protect it. It sticks everything together like edible cement. A few boiled carrots or peas roll around on the plate, adding some color and a dash of variety. Of course, there's bread, the Titanic third-class equivalent of oxygen. You use it to mop up your plate, signal for more stew, or just chew rhythmically until someone speaks up. The room buzzes with chatter, Swedish, Irish, Italian, Serbian, a dozen languages all at once. You nod politely at something you don't understand and raise your teacup as if to toast international confusion. No one's pretending this is fine dining, but no one's complaining either. You're warm, full, and sitting down, 3 gusts of wind. Indeed. You polish off the last potatoes, lean back a bit, and wonder again how something so simple can feel surprisingly satisfying. Then the waiter clears your plate, wipes the table, and vaguely gestures toward the door. Because somewhere behind you, another hungry shift is already lining up. By the time dinner arrives, you've crossed half the ship, lost a card game to a suspiciously confident kid, and witnessed a teenager argue over whose suitcase smells the most like onions. Naturally, you're hungry again. Dinner isn't as fancy as dinner or lunch, depending on how confused you still are about Edwardian meal names. Dinner isn't about impressing. It's a gentle usher to sleep without gut drama. You sit down, and once again, the waiter brings a humble meal with an unspoken message. Keep it down. All right, on the plate, thin slices of cold meat arranged with the enthusiasm of someone who sliced 700 plates of cold cuts today. What kind of meat, nobody asks. It's pale pink, lightly seasoned, and perfectly inoffensive. You chew thoughtfully, like pondering its origin might make it tastier. Spoiler, it doesn't. Next to the meat, cheese, usually white, crumbly, and tasting like a damp brick. But hey, it goes great with bread. Your trusty travel buddy. You two have developed a mutual understanding. No questions asked. It doesn't let you down. And yes, there's always tea. Always tea. Third class on the Titanic might skip wine, beer, or dignity by the plate. But your strong black coffee cup stays topped up till the bitter end, lunch. Depending on how confused you still are about Edwardian meal names, dinner isn't about impressing anyone. It's just gently ushering you to sleep without causing a stomach rebellion. You sit down, and once again, the server brings a humble meal with a side note. Keep it down. All right, on the plate, thinly sliced cold meat arranged with the enthusiasm of someone who sliced 700 plates of cold meat today. What kind of meat, nobody asks. It's pale pink, lightly seasoned, and perfectly edible. You chew thoughtfully, as if pondering its origin might make it taste better. Spoiler, it doesn't. Next to the meat is cheese, usually white, crumbly, and tastes like a damp brick. Still, it goes great with bread. Your loyal travel buddy on this journey. You two have developed a mutual understanding. No questions asked. It never lets you down. Of course, there's always tea. Always tea. Third class on the Titanic might not serve wine, beer, or the sacredness of rationing. But hey, it keeps your strong black coffee cup topped off till the very last drop. You sip slowly, half to savor it, half to stall time. A few tables down, someone's kid is singing, another person's snoring through their meal, and two young guys are quietly debating whether this is the best meal they've ever had, judging by how seriously they take it. Probably yes, no dessert, barely any fruit, but there's a gentle comfort in the simplicity of it all. The day's winding down, lights dimming, and the room feels a little less. You polish off the last bite, fold your napkin, if you even bothered pretending you ate, and lean back, full not so much from taste, but from emotion. Dinner isn't thrilling, but it's warm, shared, and honestly, that's enough. At some point during the trip, while you're sipping your third cup of tea and chewing on bread that could probably double as roofing material, you start wondering, where's the beer? After all, this is a celebration. You're crossing the Atlantic. A whole new life awaits. Today you've eaten potatoes 3 times. If anything deserves a beer, it's this. But in third class, booze isn't officially served. Not exactly banned. just strongly discouraged, meaning you either sneak your own or prepare to stay sober. That said, you start noticing things. A guy at the next table guards a weirdly shaped flask like it's holy relics. A rowdy bunch of Irish lads keep coming back from deck walks with suspiciously happy faces. An Italian dude insists his tea is spicy, maybe a language mix-up, or just overconfidence. Rumor has it, technically, you can buy beer at the third-class bar. Yes, there's a bar. It's tiny, hidden, and runs on rules so baffling you'd swear monks wrote them centuries ago. You can try ordering if you're brave, lucky, and fluent in some Edwardian bureaucratic slang. But for most third-class passengers, it's just the tea party playground. Meals come with water or tea, and that's it. Want variety? Stir your tea, or imagine it came from a French vineyard. But honestly, most people don't miss the booze. They're saving money, watching kids, or still recovering from the rough cider they downed before boarding. This isn't a drunken cruise. You're on a lifeboat, chasing a shot at a new life. Plus, surrounded by clinking dishes, 60 different voices, and the constant drone of engines below deck. The last thing you want is someone trying to jazz up the bread bench with a dance. So you sip your strong, unsweetened tea. Nod at the guy with the mysterious flask, and remind yourself sobriety has perks, like remembering where your bunk is and not mistaking the lifeboat for the outdoor bathroom at 2 a.m. Eventually, you stop asking what's for dinner and start asking, how many ways can you stew something? Because on the Titanic in third class, stew wasn't just food, it was a lifestyle. You quickly realize stew shows up anytime, any meal, with any ingredients, under any name. Irish stew, a mix of meat and veggies, or just hot stuff. It's always there. Lunch, dinner, or some mysterious snack someone dreamed up during rough seas. Stew steals the show, but don't get too excited. This isn't a gourmet, slow-cooked masterpiece with thyme and bay leaf aromas. No, this stew is practical. It's a thick, boiling mash of meat-like stuff, vegetables, and sheer determination, mostly salty, chewy, and smelling of turnips. But honestly, it's not bad. It's warm. It fills you up. It sticks to your ribs. Fancy talk for. You'll still feel it tomorrow. And you're grateful for that. Everyone around respects the stew. You'll see grown men staring at their bowls like philosophers, silently pondering if that floating chunk is lamb, beef, or just a special kind of yellow turnip. You learn to eat it fast, not because it's that delicious, but because the temperature is best described as molten lava, like a meal, and more like a lifestyle. You quickly realize stew shows up anytime, during any meal, with any ingredients under any name. Irish stew, meat and veg mashup, or just plain hot stuff. It's always there. And whether lunch, dinner, or some mysterious snack dreamed up during rough seas, stew is the party's star. But don't get excited. This isn't a slow-cooked masterpiece scented with thyme and bay leaves. No, this stew is practical, a thick, boiling concoction of meaty bits, veggies, and sheer grit. It mostly tastes salty, has a weird bounce, and smells like turnips. But hey, it's not bad. It's warm. It's filling. It clings to your ribs, which is a nice way of saying you'll still be feeling it tomorrow. And you're grateful for that. Everyone around respects the stew. You'll see grown men staring into their bowls like philosophers, silently debating whether that floating chunk is lamb, beef, or just a special kind of yellow turnip. You learn to eat it fast, not because it's so good you can't wait, but because the temperature is best described as molten lava. If you don't catch it just right, it either burns you or cools into something more like cement. The impressive thing is, the kitchen crew makes so many meals, enough to feed hundreds daily, all from one giant cauldron, probably the most heroic pan in the world. You imagine a chef sweating, stirring with disbelief, mumbling encouragement to the carrots. Of course, no seconds. This isn't a buffet. You eat what you're given. Smile, politely, and move on to some sad little carrots. Of course, no second chances here. This isn't a buffet. Buddy, you eat what you're given. Smile politely, and pretend you didn't just bite into something that might have once been cabbage or maybe shoe leather. Before your first meal on the Titanic, you might imagine eating with your hands, or a splintered wooden stick carved into a spoon by some guy. After all, you're in third class. Expectations are low, so you're pleasantly surprised when a server hands you actual cutlery. No gold plating, no family crests, but clean, metal, practical, and most importantly, appropriate. You briefly consider framing it. You get a fork, a spoon, and on special occasions, a knife that was probably sharpened on a stone sometime last century. Still, it cuts. Most things. Your plate is white enamel, tough, and a bit chipped, like it's seen some stuff, but doesn't want to talk about it. They clink gently when set down, announcing that dinner is officially serious business. And then there's the cup, a thick ceramic or tin thing with no handle and no apologies. Its train holds tea, water, or whatever suspicious liquid shows up next. It also doubles as a hand warmer, a percussion instrument, and when necessary, a mild threat weapon. You quickly take a liking to it. Napkin don't get greedy. You have a sleeve, your neighbor's elbow, and a vague hope the sauce stays on your plate this time. The tables themselves are screwed into the floor, probably to stop the Titanic from sliding around on rough seas. The benches are communal and just wide enough to sit without really relaxing. You learn to balance, lean, and brace yourself with the core strength of a circus acrobat. Eating is basically a full-body sport. Simple, yet somehow, using these tools feels almost noble. You, other passengers, and one spoon. That served 12 nationalities all share this space, all chasing stew on a plate. And when the meal ends, you don't toss the cutlery in the trash. You put it back where it belongs, because this is the Titanic. And even in third class, there are standards. You stand up from the table, still chewing lightly, and steal one last glance at your spoon before it's whisked away. At some point, probably while chewing your fourth boiled potato on this trip, you wonder who's really cooking all this food. Because it's not just you, hundreds of passengers eating 3 meals a day, plus tea, bread, and whatever that stew pretends to be. It's not just cooking, it's a logistical miracle. The answer lies deep in the belly of the ship, where the third-class kitchen is hidden like a secret you're not allowed to know. You'll never see it unless you sneak down there. And honestly, you're probably too full and too polite to try. Below decks, an army of chefs and assistants work with military precision and endurance fueled by caffeine metals. They aren't famous chefs. No autographs here, but they can peel, chop, and stir for 700 people without crying, making them heroes for any century. Their tools are industrial-sized cauldrons that could, comfortably, hold a collection of metals if needed. These iron beasts boil meat, stew veggies, and sometimes hide shoes. Everything is enormous. Bathtub-sized pots, ladles as big as shovels, and bread trays that could double as sleds if you're feeling rebellious. The menu is prepared with ruthless efficiency. No room for flair or personal flair. Nobody says, add a little lemon zest to this stew. Nope. You get carrots if there are carrots. Meat's missing. You subtract meat, but somehow, the food keeps coming regular, hot, occasionally edible, and miraculously filling. There's something admirable about the whole operation. The invisible work of men and women sweating through aprons, yelling near blazing stoves is a third passenger in itself. Like you might wonder, is this beef while spreading margarine on bread older than the iceberg? You raise your spoon in a quiet salute to them. They'll never hear it. Your compliments. They're way too busy whipping up 700 more cups of tea and chit-chatting with the stew like it's a living, breathing thing. But without them, this trip would have been a whole lot more miserable and painful. After surviving a few third-class meals on the Titanic, you start to notice a pattern, a kind of dining dance happening like clockwork. Here's how it goes. Sit, nod, eat like the ship's sinking, then bolt. Because the catch is, you're on the clock. Not officially. Of course, no manager blowing whistles or flipping hourglasses. But when 700 people need to eat in a space built for half that, pressure is real, lingering over cabbage. That's going to get you side-eyed the moment food hits the table. It's a race between hunger and the next shift. Everyone around you is on the same survival rhythm. Head down, elbows in, spoon moving like your life depends on it. Think synchronized, chewing less romance, more reality. Conversations happen, but only briefly. A grunt passing the bread, a sharp, "that's my cup," or sometimes a deep philosophical debate on whether that's beef or just heavily spiced carrots. You try to catch the server's eye once just to say thanks, but they vanish like ghosts, whisking away plates before you can even set your spoon down. These folks move stealthy like ninjas and focus like librarians hopped up on caffeine. No time for chit-chat. No weather talk or dreams, or pros and cons of a cabbage-only life. Even laughter, when it happens, is rushed. Like joy has to squeeze in between stews and sips of warm tea. You've never appreciated digestion so much. Every swallow is a precise act. Don't waste time chewing more than necessary. You've seen veterans around you dismantle a plate in 2 minutes flat and still have time to expertly butter a second roll, just when you think, maybe I'll stick around a bit longer. Just one more sip of tea. Someone behind you politely coughs. Or, not so politely, a clear signal, time's up. Coal miner. So you stand. Nod toward the table, a farewell ritual between strangers, bonded by boiled roots, and step aside for the next round. In third class, meals aren't just about food. You might have boarded the Titanic, hoping to eat with folks who speak your language, dress like you, maybe share your veggie obsession. Nope. Third-class dining is less a quiet dinner party, more a continental buffet for everyone. You sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers from everywhere: Ireland, Sweden, Syria, Italy, Poland, and places you vaguely recognize from some church map. No seating chart, no sorting by nationality or job, just whoever showed up at the same time, clutching a spoon and hope at your table. A Swedish carpenter eats like a brain surgeon. An Irish widow with 5 kids carries herself like a general. And a Serbian grandma communicates only by raising an eyebrow and glaring at the bread roll like it owes her money. No one knows each other. But within 5 minutes, everyone signs an unspoken contract: don't take more than your share. Smile gently, and never judge anyone's margarine technique. The languages around you blend into a symphony of grumbles, whispers, and half-hearted chuckles. You hear 5 different prayers before the soup hits the table. Sometimes folks translate for each other. Sometimes you just shrug and pass the salt, even if it's not really salt, but you're too polite to ask. Occasionally, someone tries to push the convo beyond the usual small talk. Usually, it's about where you're headed, who you left behind, or whether that bread could stop a bullet. You answer carefully. It became part of an unspoken contract. Don't take more than your share. Smile lightly, and never judge anyone's margarine-making skills. The languages swirling around you blend into a symphony of mumbling, whispering, and even half laughs. You can catch 5 different prayers before the soup hits the table. Sometimes people translate for each other. Sometimes you just shrug and pass the salt well. It's not really salt, but you're too polite to ask. Occasionally, someone tries steering the chat beyond the usual small talk. The questions usually revolve around where you're headed, who you left behind, or whether this loaf of bread could actually stop a bullet. You answer carefully, because even when no one says a word, everyone here is balancing excitement and fear. It's a weird kind of intimacy, sitting at the same table with strangers on a ship crossing the Atlantic. None of you really know what's waiting on the other side, but somehow, Stu pulls it off. It's universal, crossing borders, connecting people through the shared struggle of figuring out what's actually floating in there. You leave the meal without knowing anyone's name, but still remember how the Italian girl laughed, how the Norwegian kid shared his orange marmalade, and how the Serbian grandma silently judged your spoon grip. By now, you're used to third-class dining, the stews, the tea, and the unpredictable mystery meat. But eventually, curiosity kicks in. You start wondering what the folks upstairs are actually doing. Like, what exactly are they eating? And the painful part, what you're not getting. First off, no dessert in third class. Not even a sad, crusty pudding pretending to be fun. You get bread, stew, and sometimes some suspicious veggies. Want sweets? Better hope someone drops a raisin on the floor. Meanwhile, first-class passengers are enjoying a 10-course meal with unpronounceable names and ingredients that sound like they came from a fantasy novel. Peach mash with jelly. You'll survive on a baked apple and a quick nap. No menu choices either. You don't get to pick your favorite dish. You eat what you're given. No swaps. No custom orders. No complaints. Don't like the stew. You can write a stern letter and skip it. No staff introductions either. Upstairs, waiters whisper things like, "Madam, your roast beef is aged exactly 21 days down here." Some guy slaps your plate down and vanishes like a ghost behind his apron. And forget tablecloths, centerpieces, or candles. Your table's wiped down with whatever's handy. Maybe someone's sleeve. And consider yourself lucky if your spoon isn't still wet from the last tea drinker. No booze. We already mentioned that. But it stings a bit more when you hear about the fancy wine pairings upstairs while you're still nursing your third cup of tea. Even fruit is rare in first class. They nibble grapes and cut oranges with golden forks. Here, you'd cause a riot pulling a banana out of your pocket. Still, despite the lack of decorations, glam, and dessert, third-class dining never feels bitter, just practical. You might not get the full treatment, but you get fed, warmed up, company, and that little satisfying moment when someone passes you bread without you having to ask. By now, you're used to a rhythm. Wake up, eat, dodge the kids running wild, repeat. The meals might be basic, but they're on time and stop you from starving. Then comes Sunday, April 14th. You might not know it yet, but this will be the last dinner served in the Titanic's third-class dining room. That dinner, theoretically, isn't anything special. More stew, boiled potatoes, maybe some roast pork if the kitchen staff felt fancy. You notice the bread's a bit fresher. Or maybe that's just your imagination trying to make the roll feel like a hug. Everyone's eating as usual, hungry, efficient, and quiet. Laughter floats in the air. A couple celebrating their engagement. A boy showing off his harmonica. And someone just spilled tea on a kid, who's now thrilled with the attention. Nobody suspects a thing. Why would they? You chat briefly with the man next to you. A little about where you'll land in New York. You joke that if the ship keeps feeding you like this, you might get heavier by the time you dock. Not the funniest joke, but it gets a laugh. There's a flicker of hope in the room, like everyone believes the future's just in the next wave. You see parents soothing kids, young men swapping dreams, old folks staring into their cups like they're reading tea leaves. You finish your meal, the last bite of meat, the last sip of tea, and stand up. As usual, not knowing this is the last time you'll do it. That's the weird part. You have a quick chat with the guy next to you. A few words about where you'll land in New York. You joke that if the ship keeps feeding you like this, you might gain weight before you even disembark. Not the funniest joke, but it gets a laugh. There's this flicker of hope in the room. Like everyone believes the future's just on the next wave. You see parents soothing kids, young guys swapping dreams, old folks staring into their cups like they're reading tea leaves. You finish your meal, last bite of meat, last sip of tea, and stand up. As usual, you don't know this is the last time you'll do this. That's the weird part. Final moments rarely announce themselves. You head back to your bunk thinking about breakfast, wondering if they'll serve orange marmalade again. Hoping you're on the early shift, you're pretty sure that, finally, you've nailed spreading butter on bread without turning it into a sad little raft. Outside, the ship pushes forward into the North Atlantic night. Inside, the third-class dining room is quiet, empty, and spotless. Nobody knows yet. It's over. Not yet. After all, stew, tea, and bread you could use to patch a roof. What's left you? Survive on these unaward-winning meals. Served in shifts. No menu. Zero ceremony. But hey, it still keeps you alive. Not just your stomach, but something quieter, harder to put into words. When the news of the sinking spreads, the whole world fixates on the grand staircase, the golden dining room, the orchestra playing as the ship goes down. Sure, it's dramatic, but somewhere beneath all that, on Deck F, in a plain white-walled room, with tiled floors and benches screwed to the ground. There's another story. Third-class passengers aren't sipping champagne. They clutch their loaves of bread, wrap coats tight around sleeping kids, wondering how anyone could drown on a massive, modern ship like the Titanic. Some later remember that dining room as their last peaceful seat, their last spark of hope. The last place where everything seemed normal. Of course, most of it was lost. Tables, chairs, bathtubs full of pots, all swallowed by the sea. Menus never printed, soup recipes never shared, and no one snapped pictures of your spoon. History rarely asks what regular folks ate, but if you listen closely, you can still hear it. Not just the clatter of cutlery, but the clatter of languages. The bubbling, stew, soft thank yous before meals. You hear mothers slicing bread into equal parts, dads pretending to like cabbage, kids licking tin cups and giggling for no reason. That dining room was never fancy. It wasn't trying to be. It was practical, cozy, and maybe a little overenthusiastic about potatoes, but it was also about sharing, sustainability, and humanity on a ship divided by class. This was one rare space where community could grow without linens, wine lists, or orchestras. And even though it now lies beneath the Atlantic, somewhere under the waves and myths of a century, that room and those meals still matter. In 53 BC, one of the biggest mysteries in Roman military history began with a disaster. Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's richest man, and part of the original trio with Julius Caesar and Pompey, led 7 legions east into Parthian territory. His goal was simple military glory and securing Roman dominance in the east. Instead, he marched straight into disaster. At the Battle of Carrhae, near today's Turkey border, Crassus faced the Parthian Empire. Masters of desert warfare and horseback archery, though commanding about 40,000 Roman troops, Crassus badly underestimated his enemy. The Parthians, led by General Surena, brought only around 10,000 cavalry, but their mobility and relentless arrow volleys wreaked havoc. The Romans, built for close combat and tight formations, were useless on the open plains. Within 2 days, the Parthians surrounded and crushed the Roman force. Crassus's son, Publius, died early, overwhelmed and trapped. Crassus himself was lured into peace talks and executed, his head reportedly used as a prop in a Parthian play. By the end, about 20,000 Romans were dead, but another 10,000 or more vanished. Not dead, not recovered, just gone. And here, after Carrhae, the mystery deepens. Contemporary Roman sources say thousands of Roman soldiers were captured and taken deep into Parthia, possibly used as labor or soldiers along the empire's eastern borders. But what happened to them next? For centuries, no one could say. Years later, Chinese records mention a strange foreign army with unusual battle formations. This army fought in a style no Asian army at the time recognized. Could these missing Romans have moved further east, into Central Asia or even China? Sounds like a historical fantasy. Right. But the silence surrounding those lost soldiers only makes the mystery curious. Right. These weren't your average prisoners. Nope. These were well-trained soldiers, disciplined and skilled. In the ancient world, guys like that were usually recycled. not tossed in the trash. And so, the legend of the lost Roman legion was born. Strange clues started popping up in ancient Chinese texts and Central Asian towns, making historians wonder if Roman soldiers really made it all the way to the Far East, or if it was just battlefield gossip gone wild. After the catastrophic loss at Carrhae, the Parthians captured thousands of Roman prisoners, maybe as many as 10,000. These weren't some random backup troops or fresh recruits. They were seasoned legionaries, the backbone of Rome's military machine. While Rome mourned the dead and fumed with rage, the Parthians saw an opportunity. Instead of executing or enslaving all survivors, Parthian leaders, especially General Serena, took a more strategic route. They spread the prisoners all over their empire, settling many near the northeastern borders, far from Roman lands. Ancient sources suggest some soldiers were moved to Margiana, modern-day Turkmenistan. This oasis city sat near the Central Asian steppes, a key outpost on the eastern edge of the Parthian Empire. Folks believe the Romans blended into local military infrastructure there. The Parthians weren't idiots. They had first-hand experience with the efficiency of Roman discipline, formations, and tactics, using these men as border guards, builders, or even special military units made perfect sense. Margiana, often threatened by nomadic invasions, was the ideal spot to station foreign troops far enough from home to keep them in check, but close enough to defend the empire's edge. But then, history goes quiet. Roman writers, like Plutarch, talked about the defeat, humiliation, and death toll, but barely mentioned the fate of the captives. Parthian records, scarce and scattered, didn't offer much help either. The soldiers seemed to vanish into desert sands from this silence. Speculation grew. Some say the Romans married locals and slowly lost their identity over generations. Others think a core group stuck together, keeping their military structure alive, acting as mercenaries or support units far from Rome's reach. Yet, centuries later, strange reports started showing up in Chinese histories. These texts describe a mysterious band of warriors using a fish-scale formation, unlike anything seen in traditional Asian warfare. Could these stories be about those Roman prisoners? If so, those soldiers who marched to Carrhae, chasing gold and glory, might have shaped the history of a distant land, long forgotten by the empire they once served. The road east was long, but maybe not impossible. Nearly 150 years after Carrhae, this odd info pops up in the official chronicles of the Han Dynasty. It tells of a battle in 36 BC on China's far western frontier between Han forces and a Central Asian ruler named Xiongnu of the Xiongnu. The fight happened near a Xiongnu fortress city in what's now Kazakhstan along the Talas River. According to Han historian Ban in the Book of Han, Chinese generals reported encountering a strange foreign military unit in the Xiongnu army. These men fought in a fish-scale formation, a term the Chinese used to describe a tightly packed formation moving as one, very much like the Roman testudo, or turtle formation. No Central Asian army used tactics like that. This description even stood out in military accounts. This oddity made some scholars wonder if these weird troops were the remnants of the Roman legion captured at strange foreign unit in Xi Jinping's army. These guys fight in a fish-scale formation, a Chinese term for a tightly packed formation moving as one. Kinda like the Roman testudo or tortoise formation. No Central Asian army uses tactics like that. This description stands out even in military reports. This oddity has some scholars wondering if these weird troops are leftovers from a Roman legion captured in Kari. If prisoners were indeed sent east to Margiana and slowly migrated across Central Asia. Through migration, mercenary work, or forced resettlement, it's not too far-fetched that they ended up at the Jiggy Court. What makes the story even juicier is Gigi's ambition. He built a massive stone fortress, unusual for nomadic leaders, and assembled an army with advanced tactics and foreign advisors. Could these Roman-trained soldiers in the final siege? Chinese sources say the foreign troops fought like absolute warriors, holding formation to protect the walls until the Han army overwhelmed them. After this epic fail, it's believed the Han captured many of these fighters. Most were executed, but some were sent east into China, possibly resettled along the western border regions. There's one village that really stands out: Likian, located in Gansu province. The name sounds suspiciously like Legion. Local legends. The unusual facial features of its residents, and persistent rumors about Roman origins have stirred up speculation for decades. Some folks even claim Roman coins and artifacts were found there. Though these discoveries remain controversial and hard to verify, is this village the final resting place of Rome's lost boys, or just a wild historical coincidence mixed with cultural myth? The trail is faint but fascinating, and the deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. Deep in the barren lands of Gansu province, China, there's a small village with a big reputation: Lycian. For decades, this remote settlement has caught the eye of historians, geneticists, and curious folks, all drawn by an unfading legend. According to some theories, Leon might be the final resting place of Roman soldiers captured at Kai and transported east through Asia. The story starts with the name itself. Likian shows up in Han Dynasty records, and some scholars think it's a transliteration of Legion or Roma. Back in Han times, Lian was seen as a remote border outpost, far from the imperial center, and a convenient spot to resettle foreign POWs. Over time, rumors started that the folks in Likian weren't exactly Chinese. What keeps this legend alive is the villagers' appearance. Early 20th century Western visitors claimed to find people with blonde hair, bright eyes, and sharp noses, features pretty rare around here. Photos were taken, skulls measured, and the theory that Likian's residents are Roman descendants spread through the media. Several articles and books in the 20th and 21st centuries fanned the flames, discussing this idea with varying doses of skepticism and enthusiasm. In recent decades, DNA tests have been done on Likian residents. The results, not exactly a slam dunk. Some genetic markers common in Western populations appeared, but nothing definitively Roman. Critics argue Central Asia has always been a melting pot of ethnic groups, and such traits could come from centuries of mixing along the Silk Road. Still, the story's survival and the villagers' embrace keep drawing attention. Leon leans hard on its legendary heritage. Roman-themed statues greet visitors at the village entrance. Tourists get welcomed by fake centurion shows and street vendors hawking Roman souvenirs. Whether fact or folklore, the Lost Legion has become the village's cultural identity and a source of pride for its people. But the big question remains, did Roman soldiers actually settle here? Or is Likian's tale just an irresistible mashup of coincidence, local laws, and fanciful imagination? If the truth hides beneath the legend, It's buried deep under centuries of dust, silence, and empire. But one thing's for sure, the Lost Legion's journey didn't end at Liqiang. And Liqiang might just be Rome's last whisper in the East. As the legend of Liqiang grabs international attention, the obvious next step is science. When the legend of Liqiang grabs international attention, the next logical step is science. Can DNA prove or debunk the story of Roman descendants in China in the early 2000s? Chinese geneticists teamed up with international researchers to collect blood samples from some villages in Liqiang, aiming to analyze their genetic heritage. The results stirred controversy, raising more questions than answers. Early studies claimed about 56% of sampled villages showed more common genetic markers. Some folks took this as proof of the Roman theory. Yep, Romans in China, why not? Newspapers jumped on the story. Headlines screamed that the mystery of the lost Roman legion was finally solved, and TV crews flooded the village to film what looked like living proof of ancient Romans wandering around China. But the scientific community quickly waved the brakes. Hold on. Folks, geneticists pointed out that the markers found in Liqiang villages aren't exclusive to Romans or even Europe. Central Asia is a cultural melting pot for thousands of years, with people moving east to west along the Silk Road long before and after the Battle of Kay. Merchants, mercenaries, nomads, and migrants could have easily dropped those genes into the gene pool anytime. Plus, later peer-reviewed studies couldn't replicate the original findings. More thorough DNA tests showed Liqiang villages' genetics closely matched nearby Han Chinese communities. What were called European traits could just be regional quirks or centuries of mixing with Central Asian folks who look similar. Still, the idea refuses to die. Some argue that even if genetic proof is shaky, cultural, linguistic, and historical hints can't be ignored. Others say the story's romantic appeal has far outpaced the actual evidence. The scientific consensus leans toward skepticism, but the lack of disproving evidence keeps the door just barely ajar. Ultimately, genetics didn't deliver a knockout punch. It neither confirms nor fully debunks the legend of Romans in China, but it does highlight something deeper. Stories survive not just through bloodlines, but through belief. And apparently, belief is way harder to kill than science. The quest for answers goes on not just in Liqiang, but across wider historical and archaeological records. Maybe the key to this mystery isn't in genes, but in ruins, records, and half-buried paths. While genetic evidence remains unconvincing, many historians and archaeologists have shifted focus to another kind of proof artifacts: good relics, coins, weapons, fortifications, or burial sites prove that Romans ventured deep into Asia. The search has taken scholars all over Central Asia and Western China, but the trail is frustratingly faint. Around Liqiang, Roman-style artifacts have been reported for decades: coins, bits of armor, even tools that look suspiciously like Roman construction gear. Some local museums and tourism boards have hyped these finds as Roman proof, adding fuel to the legend, but experts mostly urge caution. Many of these artifacts lack verified origins, don't match known Roman designs, or could have easily arrived via trade. Roman coins, for example, have been found all over Central Asia, in Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Western China. But spotting a coin doesn't mean Romans settled there. The Silk Road was a vast trade network, and Roman goods traveled thousands of miles beyond empire borders. A Roman coin in a Chinese tomb might mean about as much as a Chinese tea bowl in a Viking grave. Weird. Sure, but not proof of migration. One of the most intriguing, but still unverified clues is the possibility of Roman-style forts near the Talas River, where Han forces clashed with the Xiongnu in 36 BC. Some researchers speculate that the stone-walled fortress described in Chinese sources might have been built with Roman help. Given its unusual design for nomadic groups, but no dig has yet uncovered clear Roman architectural techniques or inscriptions. A major hurdle in confirming this legend archaeologically is the lack of inscriptions or writings carved in stone. The Romans loved their paperwork, yet, oddly, no Latin inscriptions have ever been found. At these eastern outposts, without carved words, it's tricky to link any building or artifact directly to a Roman legion. Archaeology's silence here is both frustrating and kind of tantalizing. It leaves just enough wiggle room for doubt and hope, because history has taught us no proof doesn't always mean no truth. And maybe, somewhere in some forgotten valley, under uncharted land, the story of Rome in the East is still waiting to be uncovered, to figure out if Roman legions really made it all the way to China. We first have to look at what the Roman Empire was and how it dealt with the East. Rome was huge, sure, but it had limits. The empire stretched from misty Britannia's coast to the Syrian desert. But beyond Parthia lay a world Rome only knew in whispers, the mysterious land of Syrica, aka China. The Romans knew China existed, though in a very fuzzy, hazy way. Trade happened along the Silk Road, hauling silk, spices, jade, and other goodies westward. The Roman elite loved Chinese silk, even if they thought silk grew on trees or was combed from some mysterious leaves. The Chinese also knew about a far-off Western empire called Dakin, which scholars now agree was Rome. But contact between these two civilizations was rare and indirect. Merchants, middlemen, and translators carried goods and rumors across deserts and mountains. No official Roman envoy ever made it to the Chinese court. The closest known attempt was in 166 AD, when a group claiming to represent Andun, thought to be Emperor Marcus Aurelius, showed up in China. Scholars suspect these envoys were just merchants chasing fame. So, if official contact was almost non-existent, how likely is it that a bunch of Roman soldiers made it to China? Not totally crazy. The Silk Road wasn't just a trade route. It was a migration corridor where soldiers, mercenaries, and refugees sometimes found new homes. The Parthians had both the motive and means to redeploy Roman prisoners to their eastern frontier, and local rulers like Jichanyu often recruited foreign troops to beef up their armies. Notably, Rome stationed troops in remote, harsh places. Sometimes, for decades, border soldiers got used to cultural mashups, interracial marriages, and adapting to local customs. A legion broken by war, stripped of command, and absorbed into another culture could still survive, thrive, and then fade away. But leaping from being scattered in Parthia to serving in Central Asia and then settling in China is still a big jump. The silence from Roman historians about this migration is jaw-dropping. Still, the possibility speaks to Rome's legacy, not just as a political force, but as a human story stretching far beyond its maps. And if such a story did happen, its final chapter might not be about Rome or China, but about the tangled web of myth and memory. The legend of the lost Roman legion in the East endures, not because there's piles of proof, but because it occupies that fascinating gap between what's known, and what could be true. It's a story of possibility, captivating historians, romantics, and adventurers alike. The idea of Roman soldiers settling in some faraway land, building new lives under strange skies, is just irresistibly cool. For centuries, empires have been built on conquest, but remembered through legend. And the Lost Legion story has all the ingredients: a catastrophic defeat, an army vanishing, ancient records hinting at strange foreign troops, and a remote village with residents weird enough to spark the imagination. The lack of solid proof only adds to the mystery. Every gap in the historical record becomes an open invitation for guessing. But myths aren't worthless. Even if no Roman soldier ever set foot in Lijiang. The story shows how cultures build identity through storytelling. For Lijiang's villages, the Roman connection, real or not, became part of their heritage. It shaped local tourism, academia, and even personal pride. Similarly, for the Romans back then and modern readers today, find the idea that a Roman military thread could be woven into China's fabric pretty mind-bending. It challenges everything we thought we knew about Rome. But this is also a story about memory, how wars are remembered, how losers get forgotten, and how human instinct turns silence into legend when things don't quite add up. It's tough to swallow that 10,000 trained Roman soldiers just vanished into thin air. So, naturally, we imagine they didn't disappear. They transformed. They didn't march west to retreat. They headed east, straight into destiny. Someday, modern tech might totally prove this legend right or wrong. But until then, the Lost Legion remains a badass symbol of endurance, cultural diffusion, and the deep currents of human movement that blur all clear borders. At the very least, this legend reminds us that history isn't always carved in stone. Sometimes it lingers in the echoes of old roads, forgotten languages, the tilt or curve of a shield, and in the stories we choose to tell. Which brings us to the big question: does the legend even have to be true? If it's already real in the minds of so many, whether Roman soldiers reached China or not, the Lost Legion's story left a way bigger legacy than just a footnote in military history. It sparked decades of exploration, redrew cultural boundaries in the ancient world, and proved a single weird event can echo across continents and centuries. At its core, this legend isn't just about missing soldiers. It's about empire limits, human resilience, and the strange places where cultures collide. Rome, with all its roads and conquests, was never isolated. Neither was China. The Silk Road connected far-flung worlds, not just with goods, but with ideas, languages, beliefs, and people. Soldiers, merchants, diplomats, and prisoners traveled across Eurasia in ways historians are still piecing together. This story also forces us to rethink how we remember history. Ancient sources rarely record the fate of ordinary soldiers, especially after defeat, but that doesn't mean their stories ended with the last recorded battle. Many were absorbed into new worlds, leaving no trace. Yet some might have shaped the cultures they joined through customs, traditions, or even genetic marks. The Lost Legion legend isn't just a historical puzzle, it's a metaphor. It reflects the rise and fall of empires. But people adapt. Trained warriors can become farmers, fathers, or foreigners. The Roman eagle might never have flown back to Rome, but took root somewhere else in Lijiang. Truth and myth have tangled together. Whether that village carries Roman blood or not, its people inherited this story and made it part of their identity, and in doing so, They became a living example of history's most stubborn lesson. The past isn't static. It grows and reshapes itself, with each generation retelling the tale. So maybe the Lost Legion never built a fortress in China. Maybe it never pledged fealty to the Han banner. Maybe it just vanished. But the mystery remains not in ruins or DNA, but in the quiet belief that history is full of paths not yet uncovered or simply not yet found. And maybe somewhere beneath ancient soil, Rome's skeletons are still waiting, long before Socrates or Confucius echoed through history. A woman in ancient Mesopotamia left her mark on humanity's intellectual heritage. Her name was Enheduanna, and she's considered the world's first known author, male or female. She lived around 2300 BC in the city of Ur, in what is now southern Iraq. More than a religious figure, she was a priestess, poet, political thinker, but the mystery remains not in the rubble or DNA, but in the silent belief that history is full of unexplored paths, or simply ones not yet found. And maybe, somewhere beneath ancient soil, the skeletons of Rome are still waiting, long before Socrates or Confucius made their names echo in history. A woman in ancient Mesopotamia left her mark on humanity's intellectual heritage. Her name was Enheduanna, and she's considered the first known author in world history, male or female. She lived around 2300 BC in the city of Ur, now southern Iraq. Not just a religious figure, she was a priestess, poet, political thinker, and scholar who shaped the spiritual and intellectual life of her civilization. Enheduanna was the daughter of Sargon of Akkad, the ruler who united the city-states of Sumer and Akkad into one of the world's first empires. She was appointed high priestess of the moon god Sin and goddess Nana in Ur, wielding huge influence in both religion and politics. But it was her voice, etched into clay tablets, that sealed her place in intellectual history. She penned a bunch of temple hymns and theological poetry, including the famous Ode to Inanna, not just worshiping the goddess of love and war, but spilling the tea on her own personal devotion, struggles, and sharp insights. Her works are packed with metaphor, structure, and emotion. They show a mind that mixed theology with politics, poetry with power. Enheduanna didn't hide behind anonymity. She signed her name like a boss, declaring, "I am Enheduanna." The author of this, claiming authorship like that was revolutionary. It gave voice to women in a world ruled by kings, scribes, and priests. Her writings weren't just passive rituals. They shaped ideology. They helped standardize worship across Sumer and Akkad, quietly backing her father's political move to unite different peoples under one empire. Even more impressive, her works were copied and studied for centuries after she died. Some poems survived all the way to Babylonian times, used in scribal schools as shining examples of literary genius. Her language, a blend of Sumerian and Akkadian traditions, was itself an intellectual bridge. And Enheduanna wasn't a one-off. She was the first of many hidden women shaping philosophy, medicine, and art long before their names got famous. And while those clay tablets have worn down over time, her voice carved on official records remains a declaration. Women have always been thinkers, builders, and architects of ideas in ancient Egypt. Women weren't just respected as moms. wives, or priestesses. They were also science buffs, especially in medicine. Among the most famous was Pesichet, often called the first recorded female doctor in history. She lived around 2400 BCE, during the 5th dynasty, and inscriptions on her tomb say she supervised female doctors. Just that title alone is impressive. It means she wasn't just practicing medicine herself, but oversaw a whole squad of women physicians. Egyptian medicine was pretty advanced back then. Doctors had detailed anatomical knowledge thanks to mummification. They studied diseases, injuries, fertility, and childbirth. Many medical papyri, like the Kahun gynecological papyrus, show women's health was taken seriously and specialized. Women cared for other women, especially with pregnancy, labor, and contraception. They used surgical tools, scalpels, herbal remedies, and even complex diagnostics based on symptoms and observation. While Pesichet is the most famous, she was probably one of many brainy women. Temples, especially those dedicated to goddesses like Hathor or Sekhmet, functioned as healing centers. Female priests were trained in rituals and herbal medicine, often doubling as midwives and healers. These women weren't just assistants, they were legit scholars, memorizing long, complex medical texts passed down orally or written on scrolls. Education for women in ancient Egypt, especially from upper-class or priestly families, wasn't rare. Girls learned to read and write hieroglyphs if their status allowed. And in temple schools, they could rise up, gaining access to both scientific and sacred knowledge. The line between religion and science was pretty blurry in Egyptian thinking, and women held surprising power in that space. Even though thousands of years have passed, the names of most of these early scholars have been lost. Their contributions survive only in fragments, recipes, both scientific knowledge and sacred wisdom. The line between religion and science was pretty flexible in Egyptian thought, and women held surprisingly powerful roles in that space. Even after thousands of years, the names of most of these early scholars have been lost. Their contributions survive only in fragments, recipes, diagnoses, tomb inscriptions, and tools buried with them. Yet their legacy is unmistakable. In a world where women's education was limited for centuries afterward, ancient Egypt stands as proof of an era when women were trusted not only with lives, but with knowledge. And elsewhere in the ancient world, similar patterns emerged, especially in Greece, where a woman from the city of Cyrene dared to challenge the male monopoly on philosophy. In Cyrene, Greece now, modern day, Libya philosophy wasn't just a guy thing. Around the 4th century BC, there was a woman named Arete of Cyrene, one of the rare female philosophers known by name in the classical world. She wasn't just a quiet observer in a man's club, but a teacher, thinker, and spreader of big philosophical ideas that echoed through generations. Arete was the daughter of Aristippus, a student of Socrates and founder of the Cyrenic school of philosophy. This school focused on personal happiness, joy, and inner freedom, though not in the hedonistic way people usually assume. It taught that spiritual pleasure beats physical pleasure, and true satisfaction comes from moderation and self-control. Growing up in this intellectual environment, Arete absorbed her dad's teachings and eventually took over his role. Reports say she taught philosophy for over 35 years, guiding hundreds of students, including her son, Aristus the Younger, who was nicknamed Mom's Pupil. And no, that nickname wasn't cute fluff. He earned it because his philosophical education came straight from her, not some male tutors or schools. Most of her contributions survive only through mentions by later writers, like Dionysius Laertius, who acknowledged her leadership in the Cyrenaic tradition. While no texts by Arete are known to exist, her influence clearly shaped the ongoing development of her father's ideas, which emphasized rational ethics, intellectual freedom, and the pursuit of inner peace. These weren't your run-of-the-mill lessons in a world ruled by strict hierarchies and public showboating. They were tools for resilience and personal sovereignty. In a culture where most women were expected to stay silent and invisible, Arete led a philosophical school that guided both men's and women's thinking. She challenged the popular idea that reason and intellect were men's turf. Through teaching, she proved that women could shape philosophical systems, not just follow them. Arete's story, like many ancient female scholars, survives only in fragments. But those shards are powerful. They remind us philosophy never truly belonged to one gender. And from the sun-drenched courtyards of Cyrene, her voice still echoes soft but relentless through the annals of thought. In ancient Rome, where public life was a man's world and political speeches were a male privilege, one woman dared to take the podium and deliver one of the most legendary speeches in Roman history. Her name was Hortensia, daughter of the famous orator Quintus Hortensius Hortalus, and she was a scholar of rhetoric. But she wasn't just a language student. She used her voice to challenge Roman authority. It was 42 BC, and Rome was a political mess. Julius Caesar was dead. His successors, Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus, needed cash to fight Caesar's assassins. To raise money, they proposed taxing Rome's wealthiest citizens. The twist: this included wealthy women. Even though Roman women had no political representation or voting rights, this proposal outraged Rome's upper-class women. But only one dared to speak before the trio Hortensia at the Roman Forum, where very few women had ever spoken publicly. Hortensia stepped up and delivered a sharp and sensible critique. She argued that if women weren't allowed to hold office, serve in the army, or participate in politics, then they shouldn't be forced to fund a war they had no say in. Her harsh and well-deserved criticism: she argued that if women weren't allowed to hold office, serve in the army, or take part in politics, then they shouldn't be forced to fund a war they had no say in. Her speech was so convincing, so cleverly argued, that the trio reduced the number of women taxed from 400 down to 400. Hortensia's epic rhetoric wasn't a flash of genius. It was the result of deep intellectual training, raised in a family steeped in legal debate and oratory. She absorbed the technical details of Roman law and the power of persuasive speech. Her argument combined reason, precedent, and her speech still survives in Appian's works, giving us a rare peek at how women could flex brains and influence in a stiff, patriarchal society. She never held public office, but her words shaped policy. More than that, they challenged Rome's assumptions about who got to speak up. Hortensia reminds us that learned women didn't always hide behind scrolls or temples. Sometimes, they boldly stood in the public square, armed not with swords, but with reason. Meanwhile, in a Han Dynasty palace in China, where Confucian ideals pumped up male power and silenced women, one woman broke tradition not with rebellion, but with scholarship. Her name was Ban Zhao, remembered as China's first female historian, a Confucian scholar and tutor to royal princesses. Wit, caution, and literary savvy earned her a rare influential spot in a deeply patriarchal world. Born around 35 CE, Ban Zhao was the daughter of the respected historian Ban Biao and sister to Ban Gu, the official court historian of the Han Dynasty. When her brother died, before finishing his massive book on Han history, Ban Zhao was called on to complete it. She took up the task without hesitation. Her additions were no half-hearted edits. She compiled crucial sections, especially on astronomy, ceremonial rites, and biographies of famous women. Her contributions helped perfect a work that became one of the great historical records of Chinese civilization. But Ban Zhao's influence went way beyond history. Her most famous standalone work, Lessons for Women, turned into one of the most widely read texts on educating girls in traditional Chinese culture, while praising humility, obedience, and respect totally in line with Confucian values. It also championed education for women. Ban Zhao argued that women must read, be moral, and be intellectually prepared for their duties in marriage and motherhood. According to her, if a woman lacks knowledge, how can she manage a household or raise kids properly? Modern readers might spot a contradiction. A woman promoting traditional gender roles while living a life that defied them. But Ban Zhao's brilliance was in her subtlety. She played the system, using accepted values to argue for wider educational access. Her influence reached the royal palace, where she tutored empresses and princesses. Her voice helped shape the moral framework of the Chinese dynasty. Ban Zhao didn't storm the gates of power. She walked in with scrolls in hand, and in doing so, she opened the door for generations of Chinese women to chase knowledge. Meanwhile, in the bustling international city of Alexandria, in the 4th and early 5th centuries CE, a woman became the living symbol of classical learning. Her name was Hypatia, a mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher whose intellect attracted students from all over the Mediterranean. At a time when the Roman Empire was crumbling and religious tensions were boiling over, Hypatia stood as a beacon of reason, scholarship, and relentless curiosity. Hypatia was the daughter of Theon, a famous mathematician and philosopher at the legendary Library of Alexandria. Trained from a young age, she outpaced her father's teachings and began public lectures on philosophy, astronomy, and math. She walked in holding scrolls in her hands. And just like that, she opened the door for generations of women in China to chase knowledge. In bustling Alexandria during the 4th and early 5th centuries AD, a woman became the embodiment of classical scholarship. Her name was Hypatia, a mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher whose intellect drew students from all over the Mediterranean. At a time when the Roman Empire was crumbling and religious tensions mounting, Hypatia stood as a symbol of reason, scholarship, and the enduring power of inquiry. Hypatia was the daughter of Theon, a renowned mathematician and philosopher in News, the famous Library of Alexandria. Trained from a young age, she broke away from her dad's lessons and started teaching the public about philosophy, astronomy, and math. She taught Neoplatonism, a school of thought that focused on logic, ethics, and chasing truth through reason, carrying on Plato's brainy legacy. Her classes weren't stuck in temples or libraries. Hypatia took her lessons out to the streets and forums, going all public with it. Alexandria, drawing crowds of students, pagans, Christians, you name it. She wrote treatises on conic sections, upgraded designs for astrolabes, and maybe even helped preserve parts of Euclid's works. And Ptolemy's Almagest. No original works by her survive, but her legacy echoes in the writings of her students and friends. But Hypatia lived in turbulent times. Christianity was becoming the big boss of the Roman world, and Alexandria was a hotbed of religious drama. Hypatia, a famous pagan scholar and public intellectual, became the epicenter of both admiration and rage. Her close friendship with Roman governor Orestes made her enemies with Bishop Cyril, the Christian kingpin of Alexandria. In 415 AD, a mob of Christian zealots brutally murdered her, stripped her naked, dragged her through the streets, and hacked her body up inside a church. Her death wasn't just the end of a life. It symbolized the epic collapse of classical Western scholarship and kicked off a darker intellectual era. Still, Hypatia's memory lived on. Medieval Arab scholars mentioned her contributions. Enlightenment thinkers hailed her as a martyr for reason. And today, she's an enduring icon of female scholarship and courage in science. In ancient Jewish academia, dominated by male clerics who controlled public discourse and sacred text interpretation, women were mostly shut out of formal education and legal authority, yet even within these strict boundaries, Jewish women found subtle but powerful ways to participate and shape the intellectual life of their communities. Rarely recorded as rabbis or sages, their voices still appear in Talmudic texts, midrash commentaries, and oral traditions, revealing a hidden world of female scholarship. And one such figure was Beriah, a legendary woman from Talmudic times. Thought to have lived in the 2nd century AD, she was married to Rabbi Meir, one of the most respected sages of the time, and daughter of Rabbi Hananiah ben Adon, a martyr under Roman persecution. Beriah was known not just for piety and moral strength, but also for her deep knowledge of Jewish law. The Talmud records her debating male scholars and beating them at arguments, a rare nod to a woman in that era. In one passage, she corrected her husband's interpretation of a psalm, offering a more empathetic reading. In another, she challenged a Jewish cleric's assumption, using textual logic to debunk him. These stories aren't just metaphors, they're rare acknowledgments of women's intellectual roles in sacred law. While women were mostly banned from yeshivot, official Jewish schools, they were often educated at home. Especially in prominent families, daughters of scholars learned Hebrew, Aramaic, Torah, and ethics. These women preserved and passed on traditions through storytelling, questioning, and commentary, shaping the spiritual framework for their children and communities. Later, Talmudic commentaries even reference unnamed women who contributed insights on legal debates, medical knowledge, and ritual practice. Some of these contributions survive only as footnotes or endnotes in male-authored works, but their presence is undeniable. They form a patchwork of memory, fragmented, incomplete, but rich in meaning. In a culture that prized learning, Jewish women found their way into the conversation, not by tearing down barriers, but by speaking up. In Jewish women found ways to join the conversation, not by smashing barriers, but by speaking up. In ancient India, long before printed books or formal universities, philosophy, poetry, and spirituality were passed down, mouth, and on that river of wisdom. Women were definitely not silent passengers. They were the voices, the composers, the ones asking the tough questions. Among the earliest and most powerful were the wise women of the Vedic and early post-Vedic eras, whose verses still echo in Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist traditions. One of the standout examples comes from the Rig Veda, one of the oldest sacred texts on the planet. Among thousands of hymns are some believed to be by women called rishikas, basically, female prophets, Lamudra, Gosha, Apala, and their crew are credited with hymns about metaphysics, rituals, and inner experiences. For instance, Lamudra joined her husband, the sage Agastya, in a spiritual debate, challenging his materialist views with sensory life. Her verses aren't just poetic charm, they're philosophically bold too, centuries later. As religious movements surged across South Asia, female saint poets popped up again with deeply personal and mystical works. In Tamil Nadu, Andal, a young girl adopted by a priest, wrote fiery hymns to Lord Vishnu that mixed theology with raw emotion. Her songs are still sung in South Indian temples today. Up north, women like Mirabai, though medieval, learned from ancient traditions. Born into royalty, Mirabai rejected social norms, praised her spiritual marriage to Krishna, and wandered as a devotee. Her poems slamcast gender roles and religious hierarchy while showering the divine with intense love. According to Buddhist tradition, these Therigatha verses, written in Pali around the 6th century BCE by senior nuns, capture the voices of early Buddhist women. These poems were read aloud by former queens, courtesans, and women-turned-nuns, talking about enlightenment, renunciation, and the fight for freedom. One nun, mother of Sumangala, puts it plainly, "I gave up my son, my wealth, and even my desires. Now I walk the path of peace." These women weren't just a minority, they were foundational. Their poetry wasn't just devotional, it was philosophical, social commentary, and deep psychological insight. Even if their biographies got lost or cut short, their words live on for centuries. Ancient female scholars' contributions got shoved to the sidelines. Their works were blasted out of cannon mouths, their names erased from manuscripts, and their achievements buried under layers of cultural bias and institutional erasers. Yet their voices still ring out, sometimes softly, sometimes fragmented, always resisting silence. What connects the women we've explored, from Enheduanna in Sumer to Banjao in China, from Hortensia in Rome to the Rishikas in India, isn't just rarity. It's their persistence. They lived in societies that restricted access to formal education, office, or women's authorship rights. But they found ways in through family lines, religious institutions, poetic traditions, or political crises. They seized moments of opportunity and built intellectual legacies with the tools at hand. Many of these women used culturally accepted roles like priestess, healer, mother not as limits, but as foundations. And Enheduanna used her religious status to compose hymns that influenced an empire. Burabi and Banjao entered male-dominated academia while advocating education for women. Hypatia lectured in public squares. Hortensia directly challenged political leaders. None of them waited for permission to think. But why were they forgotten? Because history keepers, scribes, monks, librarians were mostly men, and often didn't care much about preserving women's stories. Over time, entire chapters of intellectual history got rewritten, filtered through the assumption that great ideas belong to men. This isn't just a loss, it's erasure. Restoring the lives and work of ancient female scholars isn't about slapping modern identity politics onto the past. It's about restoring balance. It's about admitting that the foundations of science, philosophy, literature, and spirituality weren't just built by men alone. Women were always there stargazing, writing poetry, debating laws, healing, and asking the tough questions about life and truth. Their stories change how we understand the past. More importantly, they challenge who gets to shape the future. Because every time we dig up some forgotten scholar, we rewrite the meaning of knowledge and who owns it. And in doing so, we don't just honor their legacy, we expand it. Back in 1948, deep in the eternal ice of the Alai Mountains, Soviet archaeologists stumbled upon something that could flip everything we thought we knew about ancient tattoo art. It wasn't just a skeleton or a few trinkets. What they found was a perfectly preserved mummy frozen for over 2,400 years. This is the famous burial site of the Pazyryk people, belonging to a Saiyan nobleman, whose skin was covered in animal tattoos. Mythical beasts danced across his limbs, in elegant curves and spirals long antlered deer, fierce-clawed unicorns, and magical cats ready to pounce. These weren't just doodles or body art for fun. These were sacred symbols of power, identity, and status. In Saiyan society, tattoos told stories who you were, what you'd done, and how high you ranked. This man was buried with fancy clothes, intricate gold jewelry, and a sacrificial horse team. But even without all that, the tattoos alone screamed high status. Their placement on his arms, shoulders, and legs revealed a tradition reserved for nobles and warriors. You couldn't just stroll into a Saiyan camp and demand a tiger on your back. These designs were earned. And the technique, while primitive, was insanely precise. They used bone or bronze needles to pierce the skin, rubbing in soot or crushed charcoal. The pain was brutal, but that was part of the deal. Enduring the needle was a badge of honor, a sign of toughness. And when you died, those tattoos traveled with you to the afterlife, your soul protected by symbols of honor and strength. Today, the Pazyryk mummies rest in Russian museums, but their legacy lives on in the skin of tattoo artists and anthropologists. These tattooed warriors remind us that tattoo art didn't pop up first in a sleek modern studio. It was born on windy mountain steps, frozen tombs, and the skin of ancient kings. And if that's what the Saiyan left behind, wait till you see what the Egyptians did. At the heart of ancient Egypt, long before ink met needle in modern studios, tattoos played a different role, a culture rooted in magic, medicine, and ritual. While pharaohs' tombs and temples steal most of the spotlight, the quiet marks on women's bodies tell a whole other, much more personal story. In 1891, archaeologists uncovered the mummy of a woman now known as Amunet, a priestess of the goddess Hathor. Buried around 2000 BCE, her body was covered in a network of black dots and lines running across her arms, torso, and thighs. This wasn't decoration. These were symbols of sacred protection, fertility, and ritual status, permanently etched into her skin. Tattoos in ancient Egypt seemed mostly reserved for women during the Middle Kingdom. Nuns, midwives, and sacred dancers sported geometric tattoos arranged in bands and symmetrical patterns. These marks were deliberately placed, often on the belly, chest, and pelvis. They might have protected childbirth, boosted healing powers, or enhanced rituals in temples dedicated to goddesses like Hathor or Isis. Unlike the ornate animal tattoos of the Scythians, Egyptian designs were simple but powerful. Their repetition and symmetry screamed ritual meaning, not just art for art's sake. Every line and dot acted like an eternal charm soaked in spiritual power. The tools were crude, by today's standards, copper or bronze needles, sometimes sharp bones dipped in soot or indigo pigment. The pain was intense, but that was part of the deal, of the ritual. Sometimes, tattooing came with hymns or chants, turning the whole thing into a sacred ceremony. Thieves' murals show female musicians and dancers sporting similar tattoos, proving that tattooed women definitely had a role in religious life. They're choreographed. Rhythmic moves made those tattoos come alive during ceremonies, while the Scythians wore their myths like armor. Egyptian women wore prayers stitched into their skin to protect, heal, and honor the divine. Next, out in the remote islands of the Pacific, tattoos evolved into a full-blown language, a biography etched on skin. Across the vast Pacific seas, tattooing wasn't just tradition anymore. It became identity. In Polynesian cultures, especially Samoa, Tonga, and the Marquesas Islands, tattoos called tatau are living texts. They carry the weight of ancestry, status, courage, and spiritual connection. Every curve and line meant something. In many communities, not having tattoos meant you were incomplete. Unlike Egypt or Scythia, Polynesian tattoos were huge and in your face for men. These tattoos often stretched from waist to knees, wrapping around thighs, buttocks, and lower back. This intricate design, called pea in Samoa, could take months or even years to finish. The pain was brutal, the process savage, but the result, a personal masterpiece. Wearing that ink was a loud declaration of endurance, honor, and your connection to your ancestors. The tools were just as symbolic as the designs. Tattoo artists, called tufaga, used handmade combs carved from elephant tusks or turtle shells. They dipped them in soot-based ink and hammered the pigment into the skin. The sound, the rhythmic tapping of bone on bone was part of the ritual, as sacred as the ink itself. Women got tattoos too, though their designs were usually smaller and placed on arms, thighs, and around the mouth in some areas. Malu, delicate patterns on the inner thighs, symbolized grace, maturity, and a woman's readiness to serve her community. These tattoos, though less common than men's, were just as sacred. Tattooing ceremonies were social and spiritual events. Families gathered. Songs and prayers filled the air, and blood, sweat, and ashes mingled to create rituals that connected the living with the dead. It was believed ancestors watched over the ceremony, guiding the artist's hand and blessing the wearer. Tattooing in Polynesia wasn't a fashion statement. It was a contract between individual, tribe, and gods. Refusing to get tattooed could bring shame, but accepting it, you wore your whole lineage on your skin. From the Pacific Islands, this tradition echoed through time, eventually spreading to missionaries, colonizers, and even prisons. But long before that, in Japan, another transformation was happening. Tattoos were about to become a visual symbol for both devotion and defiance. In Japan, tattoo art evolved along two seemingly opposite paths, sacred and forbidden, called irizumi. These ink designs started in spiritual and decorative contexts, but over time came to represent crime, rebellion, and raw endurance. What began as devotion ended up stigmatized, yet the art never faded. The earliest proof of tattoos in Japan dates back over 10,000 years to the Jomon period. Clay figurines from this era bear marks believed to represent tattoos on the body. These might have been linked to religious rituals, protective symbols, or shaman status, but it wasn't until the Edo period 1868 that this complex visual language really took off. At first, tattoos served spiritual purposes. Some Buddhist monks tattooed sacred Sanskrit characters on their arms as a sign of vows and meditation focus, symbolized crime, rebellion, and raw endurance. What started as devotion ended up as stigma, but this art never truly faded away. The earliest evidence of tattooing in Japan dates back over 10,000 years to the Jomon period. Clay figurines from that era show marks believed to represent tattoos on the body. These might be linked to religious rituals, protective symbols, or shaman status. But it wasn't until much later. In the Edo period, 1868, that this complex visual language really took off. At first, tattoos served spiritual purposes. Some Buddhist monks inked sacred Sanskrit characters on their arms, showing their vows and meditation focus. Some designs aimed to shield the wearer from evil spirits or acted as permanent prayers. Others reflected a monk's personal devotion to scripture, a body seated in compassion. But over time, irizumi slid into darker associations. During Edo times, authorities used tattoos as punishment. Criminals were branded with symbols on their foreheads or arms as a lifelong stigma. These forced tattoos weren't decoration, they were shame, designed to exile offenders from society forever. But here's the kicker: those marks, ironically, became badges of rebellion. Outlaws, gamblers, and eventually the Yakuza underground took tattoos as a mark of honor. They flipped the stigma on its head, covering themselves with dragon, koi fish, tiger, geisha, and mythological scenes. The process was brutal, usually done with a long metal needle called a nomi and a steady hand, slowly pushing ink for weeks or even years. These full-body tattoos hidden under clothes became symbols of strength, stoicism, and loyalty. When clothes came off in a bath, a person's tattoo legacy was revealed bold, intricate, and deeply personal. Illegal or frowned upon, irizumi survived as an underground art form. Tattoos in Japan became a mirror reflecting society's contradictions: spiritual yet rebellious, sacred yet sinful. A monk might ink enlightenment, while a gangster inks his code. While Japanese ink dances Between light and shadow across the ocean, Native Americans carved ink into bone to honor family, land, and the spirit world. Long before Columbus hit the New World, Native Americans had rich, diverse tattoo traditions, each tied to land, lineage, and the sacred from Arctic tundra to Central American jungles. Tattoos acted as living records of heritage, achievements, and spiritual rank. In Inuit communities up north, tattoos were mostly a women's thing. Women sported delicate black lines on chins, cheeks, and foreheads, carved with a method both crude and precise. Threads dipped in soot were pulled under the skin with bone needles. These facial tattoos weren't just decoration. They marked a woman's readiness for marriage, her spiritual ties, and her pain tolerance. Some even believed tattoos could guide souls to the afterlife. Further south in North America's forests and plains, tribes like the Sioux, Osage, and Hohokam used tattoos to show rank, bravery, and tribal bonds. A warrior might get inked for acts of valor in battle. Each design stood for a specific feat or honor. These tattoos were earned, never easy, and their stories were known across the community. The process often involved sharp tools made from obsidian or fishbone. With pigments from charcoal or earth minerals, tattoo rituals were communal and sacred. Elders, shamans, or designated tattooists performed the rites, often with chants and prayers. The pain was intense, but it forged resilience and pride. In Central America, the Maya and Aztec turned tattooing into theatrical rituals. Tattoos were inked during religious festivals honoring gods like Quetzalcoatl or intricate snake, celestial, or hieroglyphic designs, strategically placed on the body for magical effect. Warriors wore tattoos as signs of sacrifice and status, while priests used them to channel divine energy. Across the Americas, tattoos weren't just skin deep. They connected people to ancestors, worldviews, and their communities. Each mark was a permanent thread in the tapestry of identity. As colonialism spread across continents, many of these traditions were brutally suppressed, but the ink never fully faded, woven permanently into their community's fabric. Each mark a thread in the tapestry of identity. When colonialism spread across continents, many of these traditions were brutally suppressed, but tattoo ink never fully faded away. It lived in secret, in scars, in memory, and thousands of years ago, across the sea. A mummy buried under volcanic ash left behind the world's oldest known tattoos, and there's still a mystery waiting to be solved. In 1991, two hikers in the Ötztal Alps near the Austria-Italy border stumbled upon what they thought was a frozen mountaineer. What they actually found was a man frozen in time, over 5,000 years old, but beyond his clothes, tools, and mysterious cause of death, Ötzi was carrying something even cooler. Tattoos? Yep, exactly 61 of them. Not the artsy or symbolic kind you see in other ancient cultures, but simple marks, parallel lines and crosses inked on his ankles, knees, lower back, and wrists. Definitely not a beauty contest. Their spots line up almost perfectly, with joints that showed signs of stress or injury on CT and X-rays. This led researchers to believe these tattoos might have been a form of ancient acupuncture or pain relief. The ink was made from soot or ash, rubbed into tiny cuts on the skin, a tattoo method pretty much straight out of the prehistoric playbook. Mind-blowing to think that 3,300 years before Jesus showed up, prehistoric Europeans were already using ink and needles not just for ID or rituals, but possibly for medicine. Ötzi's tattoos are the oldest preserved tattoos in human history. They offer a rare, direct glimpse into prehistoric life, a world without written language. But bodies still had plenty to say. Every carved line on his skin might have been a cry for help, a survival sign, or maybe a bit of both. And the fact these marks survived thousands of years under ice is just ridiculous. Unlike the fancy ritual tattoos of Egyptian nuns or Polynesian warriors, Ötzi's body art wasn't about honor or status. It was all about function, even healing. But hidden in that raw practicality is something deeply human, the urge to leave a mark. To use the body both as a journal and a medicine cabinet. Tattoo ink reminds us that tattoo art didn't start in temples or tribes. It began with pain, survival, on ancient mountains where every scar told a story, though he was the first. Ötzi wasn't the last. In Southeast Asia's highlands, tribal tattoos became a big deal, a symphony of bravery, blood, and multi-generational memories. In the crowded highlands of Southeast Asia, tattooing turned into a living chronicle of pain and pride. For the folks in Borneo, the Philippines, and northern Thailand, ink is part of their identity. It marks coming of age, warrior spirit, spiritual favor, and deep connections to ancestors. Not just decoration. Tattoos are sacred heritage. Each line screams connection, courage, or harmony with the spirit world. In the Kinga region of the Philippines, tattoo traditions have been evolving for centuries. This ancient tattoo style was mostly done by women called mambabatok, using sharp calamansi thorns or other citrus spikes as needles, and soot or charcoal for ink. These tattoo artists tapped patterns onto skin with wooden sticks, slow and painful. Sure, but that pain was part of the power. For Kinga warriors, each tattoo marked a successful expedition. The more Incan qualities a man had, the more respect he earned. These tattoos weren't just worn, they were earned. Chest, arms, even faces could be covered in complex geometric patterns, stylized animals, and ancestral motifs. These weren't personal fashion statements, they were social proof, carrying the weight of tradition and responsibility. Women got tattoos not for war, but to celebrate beauty, fertility, and readiness for marriage. Their ink symbolized grace, spiritual purity, and family lineage. Mothers often passed down the designs and arrangements to daughters, and ancestral patterns. These aren't just personal statements, they're social proof, carrying the weight of tradition and responsibility. Women also tattooed not for war, but to claim the right to honor beauty, fertility, and readiness for marriage. Their ink symbolized grace, spiritual purity, and family lineage. Mothers often passed down patterns and layouts to daughters, creating vivid heritage lines etched in skin across generations. In Borneo, the Dak tattoo culture reflects similar values. Spirals, starbursts, and animal motifs weren't just pretty. They were guides to the afterlife. People believed tattoos would glow in the spirit world, lighting the soul's journey after death. Someone without tattoos might get lost in the afterlife, unable to find their ancestors. Awkward, right? Like many cultures, invasions and missionary influence nearly wiped out these traditions. Tattoos got labeled pagan, crude, or just plain embarrassing. But the old folks in remote villages kept the craft alive, secretly preserving what they could. Today, There's a tattoo renaissance. Descendants of those tattooed warriors and nuns are reclaiming Bartok not as a trendy fad, but as a heritage. Old designs are making a comeback, proving that while ink might fade on skin, it rarely fades from memory. Across the vast deserts and rocky plateaus of North Africa, the Amazigh, often called Berbers, developed a tattoo tradition unlike any other. In this fiercely independent matriarchal culture, tattoos weren't hidden on shoulders or thighs. They were boldly inked on the face between the eyes, on the cheeks, or under the chin. Each mark was a sentence in an older language than writing. Stories passed from mother to daughter, generation to generation. Berber tattoos, called tishboot, served many purposes. At the most basic level, they were aesthetic, meant to boost a woman's beauty or mark her coming of age. But deeper down, they held spiritual power and protection. For example, a tiny cross tattoo between the eyebrows was believed to ward off the evil eye. Lines stretching from the chin could indicate marital status, tribal roots, or religious devotion. For Berber women, getting tattooed was also a badge of endurance and agency. The tools were simple: a sharp thorn or needle dipped in soot, indigo, or even herbal powder. Skin was pricked and rubbed repeatedly until the pigment stuck, usually accompanied by songs, laughter, or prayers. This was no mere beauty treatment. It was a sacred community ritual. Some patterns had very private meanings. Triangles could symbolize fertility or a connection to Tanit, a pre-Islamic goddess linked to life and protection. Dots, stars, and crescent shapes reflected beliefs about celestial bodies or ancestral spirits. In many villages, facial tattoos were considered a woman's soul map, but these traditions are under threat. With Islam spreading across North Africa, tattooing began to clash with religious doctrine. Many Islamic scholars saw permanent body modification as haram, strictly forbidden. The result? This practice slowly faded away. What once marked a woman's honor is now seen by some as a sign of backwardness. Yet in remote mountains, older women still wear these scars with pride. Quiet pride, living proof of a time when stories were carved into skin instead of scribbled on paper. Anthropologists and the younger generation are now racing to document this fading legacy before it vanishes completely. And finally, as this cosmic GPS has traveled through centuries and continents, one question remains: how did tattooing transform from a sacred rite into modern pop culture? The answer lies in the global clash of colonialism, criminalization, and cultural revival. As the 20th century dawned, ancient tattoo art found itself caught in a whirlwind of invasion, stigma, and reinvention. What was once sacred, communal, and symbolic became misunderstood or vilified in many parts of the world. Colonial powers, especially from Europe, viewed indigenous tattoo traditions through lenses of superiority and religious judgment. Across continents from Africa to Polynesia, the Americas to Southeast Asia, traditional tattoos were suppressed, banned, or branded barbaric. Missionaries condemned them as pagan. Governments outlawed them as signs of tattoos was either banned or seen as savage. Missionaries condemned it as heresy. Governments banned it, seeing it as a sign of criminality or social deviance. In Japan, the Meiji government outlawed tattoos in the late 1800s, worried it would embarrass the nation. on the world stage. In the Philippines, tattooed warriors had to hide their heritage under Western clothes. In North America, indigenous tattoo art was pushed into oblivion by assimilation policies and boarding schools. And in many Muslim-majority areas, tattoos quietly vanished under the shadow of religious taboos. But ink never really disappeared. Everything just went silent. In the shadows of seaports, prisons, and subcultures, tattoo art kept growing. Sailors brought ink back from faraway lands, marking their journeys on their bodies. In the West, tattoos became a badge of rebellion, loved by circus performers, bikers, and society's outcasts. The art shifted from sacred to subversive. Then, something changed. By the late 20th century, tattoos made a comeback not as taboo, but as a way to show off personality. Indigenous artists worldwide started reviving ancestral styles, reconnecting with stories etched deep in their blood. Renaissance folks in Samoa, Borneo, and the Arctic rebuilt ancient tools and rituals. In North America, indigenous tattooers relearned and preserved traditions nearly lost. Today, tattoo art is booming again. It's global, hybrid, and digital, but also honoring its roots more than ever. Modern tattoo shops exist side by side with tribal ceremonies. Flash sheets on Instagram sit next to bone tools and hand-mixed inks. What was almost erased is now proudly restored. Tattoos started as a ritual transformed through repression and have come back as a bridge between past and present, between self and ancestors. Every dot, line, and symbol echoes voices from those who came before Scythian nobles, Egyptian priestesses, Polynesian warriors, and countless others who chose to wear their stories on their skin.